2 seats, 1 dream trip, and a single, silent question that would ignite a firestorm at 30,000 feet. Do you belong here? For 16-year-old twins Amara and Ayana Sterling, the world felt like it was sparkling. The air inside the exclusive Ascend first-class cabin was cool, crisp, and smelled faintly of leather and possibility. This wasn't just any flight. It was a bridge to their heritage, a surprise trip from their father to spend the summer in London with the grandparents they adored. Ayana, ever the observer, ran her hand over the smooth, cream-colored pod of her seat, 2A, a grin stretching across her face. Amara, in 1A, was already exploring the entertainment system, her fingers dancing across the screen as she mapped out the movies she would watch on their transatlantic journey. They were kids, yes, but they carried themselves with a quiet confidence that belied their years, a trait inherited from parents who had taught them their worth was intrinsic, not defined by the opinions of others. They settled in, the low hum of the Boeing 777, a soothing promise of adventure. A flight attendant offered them pre-departure orange juice in real glass flutes, and they toasted each other, their laughter a bright, happy sound in the serene cabin. It was perfect, and then they felt it, a shift in the atmosphere, as subtle as a change in air pressure. Across the aisle, a woman sat, impeccably dressed in a Chanel-style tweed jacket, her blonde hair coiffed into a perfect helmet. She wasn't looking at a magazine or her phone. She was looking at them. Her stare was not one of idle curiosity. It was cold, analytical, and heavy with a judgment that felt as tangible as a physical object. It was a stare that scanned their designer tracksuits, their carefully braided hair, their youthful, excited faces, and concluded, with absolute certainty, that there had been a mistake. They had been taught to ignore such things, to rise above the silent questions of a world that sometimes saw their skin color before it saw them. But this was different. It wasn't a fleeting glance. It was a sustained, piercing gaze of accusation. The unspoken question hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Do you belong here? The dream trip suddenly had a shadow cast over it, a chill that the warm cabin air couldn't erase. But this wasn't just a look. It was the opening shot in a battle for dignity they never expected to fight, and the first person to betray them would be the one paid to help. The flight attendant approached with a smile, but that smile wasn't for them. It was for their accuser. Her name tag read Cassandra, and she moved with the practiced grace of someone who had walked this aisle 1,000 times. She was the senior attendant, the queen of this domain. Mrs. Davenport, the woman in the tweed jacket, flagged her down with a discreet but urgent wave of her manicured hand. The twins couldn't hear the words, but they didn't need to. The conversation was a pantomime of prejudice they knew all too well. A hushed, conspiratorial tone from Mrs. Davenport. A pointed finger, quick and sharp as a needle, jabbed in their direction. A series of concerned, sympathetic nods from Cassandra. The flight attendant's professional smile tightened into a mask of dutiful concern. When Cassandra finally turned and walked toward the twins, her path seemed to carve a line in the cabin floor, separating their side from the other. The smile she offered them was thin, brittle, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Excuse me, girls," she began, her voice a carefully modulated blend of politeness and authority. "There seems to be a little bit of a mix-up with the seating." Ayana, ever the calmer of the two, simply unlocked her phone and held it up. On the screen was the Ascend app, glowing with their digital boarding passes. 2 names, Amara Sterling and Ayana Sterling, and 2 seat numbers, 1A and 2A, were displayed in bold, clear font. "There's no mix-up," Ayana said, her voice even and clear. "These are our seats." It was irrefutable proof. Digital, verifiable, and absolute. But to Cassandra, it was an inconvenience. She gave the phone screen a glance, so fleeting it was insulting, her eyes barely registering the information before dismissing it entirely. "I understand that's what your phone says," she said, a condescending edge creeping in her tone, "but we have a very distinguished platinum member here." She gestured back to Mrs. Davenport, who frequently sits in this cabin. "Sometimes the system has glitches." I'm sure we can find you two another, more comfortable spot in the back. The implication was a slap in the face. More comfortable in the back. It wasn't about a glitch, it was about their presence. Amara, whose patience was wearing thin, leaned forward. Her voice was lower than her sister's, but it carried a new fire. What kind of mistake? Our names are on the tickets. The seats are paid for. We're not moving. Cassandra's mask of politeness began to crack. She had expected compliance, perhaps a bit of grumbling, but not this calm, unwavering resistance. This was not going according to her script. Her job was to keep the high-value customers happy, and Mrs. Davenport was visibly agitated, watching the exchange with an impatient scowl. The flight attendant's loyalty was clear. It wasn't to her employer's booking system or to the simple facts in front of her. It was to the perceived hierarchy within the cabin. "Young lady," Cassandra said, her voice dropping the pretense of sweetness and taking on a stern, maternalistic tone. "I'm not asking, I'm telling you. There has been a mistake. Now, are you going to move, or am I going to have to find someone to help you move?" The argument was no longer whispered. The cabin, which had been a low hum of quiet activity, was now falling silent. Passengers were lowering their books, pausing their movies. They were the center of an unwanted, humiliating spectacle. This was no longer about seating arrangements. It was a public trial of their very right to exist in this space. With every word, Cassandra wasn't just denying their seats. She was denying their reality, putting their very presence on trial in front of a silent jury of strangers. "You're making a scene," Ayana said, her voice still steady, but now laced with an icy disappointment. "We have valid tickets. You are refusing to honor them because that woman," she gestured with her head towards Mrs. Davenport, "doesn't think we belong here." "Is that the official policy of Ascendair?" The direct question, the use of the airline's name as a challenge, cornered Cassandra. Her face flushed. She was losing control, and she knew it. The situation had escalated beyond her ability to manage with simple dismissals. She had two choices: admit the facts and apologize, alienating a valuable customer, or double down on her fabricated reality. She chose the lie. She turned away from them, raising her internal headset to her lips. "This is Cassandra in first. I have a duplicate seating issue in 1A and 2A, she said, her voice now filled with a manufactured sense of urgency and distress. "The passengers are uncooperative." "Yes, uncooperative. I'm going to need security assistance at the gate, please." The words hit them like a physical blow. Uncooperative, a word that painted them as belligerent, as troublemakers, as the aggressors. They had done nothing but hold their ground, armed with the truth, and in response, she had summoned a threat. Their proof was dismissed. Their dignity was questioned. But when Cassandra uttered that word, security, into her headset, the situation was about to escalate from a humiliating argument to a terrifying threat. The word security echoed through the hushed cabin. The dream trip had officially become a nightmare. Time seemed to warp. The minutes stretched into an eternity as they waited, the silence in the cabin now thick with tension. Every eye was on them. Some faces held sympathy, others a cold curiosity, as if watching a drama unfold for their entertainment. One woman a few rows back had her phone up, discreetly recording. An older businessman pointedly opened his newspaper, creating a wall between himself and the unpleasantness. To be the subject of such intense, varied scrutiny felt like being stripped bare. Amara felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up her neck. They hadn't done anything wrong, yet they were being made to feel like criminals. Then, they appeared at the door of the jet bridge. Two men, their broad shoulders filling the entryway. They weren't the friendly gate agents. They were airport security, their uniforms crisp, their faces impassive, their belts heavy with the tools of enforcement. They moved with a purpose that instantly changed the cabin's dynamic from tense to dangerous. They didn't ask questions. They didn't survey the situation. They walked directly to Cassandra, who stood waiting for them like a general directing her troops. She pointed, a single, definitive gesture. "These two," she said, her voice regaining its confidence now, that she had backup. I've explained to them that their seats are double booked, and they are refusing to move. We can't delay the flight any longer. A blatant, calculated lie, delivered with the full authority of her uniform. One of the officers, a burly man with a thick neck and tired eyes, addressed the girls not as passengers, but as problems to be solved. "Ma'am, you've been asked to move. We need you to gather your things and come with us now." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, the voice of a man who had repeated this line countless times. Amara's heart was pounding against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and fury. "We are not moving," she said, her own voice trembling slightly but laced with steel. "We have our tickets." She is lying. She looked the officer in the eye, trying to will him to see the truth. But he wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for compliance. "I don't care about your tickets," he grunted, his patience already gone. "I care about this plane taking off on time. Now let's go." This was it. The moment where civility broke down completely. He reached down, his hand a meaty paw, and wrapped his fingers around Amara's upper arm. The contact was electric, a violation that sent a shock wave through her body. It wasn't just a touch. It was an assertion of physical dominance. He was going to physically drag her, a 16-year-old girl, out of her rightfully paid-for seat. "Get your hands off my sister," Ayana's voice snapped, sharp and cold as breaking ice. All her previous calm was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective instinct. The officer ignored her, his grip tightening on Amara. "Let's go. Now." He started to pull. Amara resisted, planting her feet, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. On their dream trip, in front of all these people. The humiliation was a physical pain, sharp and deep. While Amara was locked in this terrifying tug-of-war, Ayana's mind was working on a different track. The confrontation, the injustice, the public shame, it was all secondary now to the immediate physical threat to her twin. Her hands were shaking, but her resolve was firm. She ducked her head slightly, her phone in her lap, shielded from the view of the officers. Her thumb flew across the screen, her movements deft and practiced. She pulled up a contact simply labeled Dad. Her fingers typed out a single, frantic message, 3 words that carried the weight of all their fear and desperation. "They need you." She hit send, the small swoosh sound swallowed by the tense cabin noise. There was no time for more. She didn't know if he would see it. Her father was a busy man, often in back-to-back meetings. The plane doors were about to close. The ticking clock was the voice of the head flight attendant announcing the final boarding call over the intercom. It was a desperate Hail Mary, a message in a bottle thrown into a digital ocean. The guard was pulling harder on Amara's arm now, his knuckles white. Amara cried out, a small, sharp sound of pain and outrage. It was that sound, that cry, that seemed to finally pierce the bubble of passenger apathy. A man across the aisle stood up. "Hey, take it easy," he said, his voice firm. "They're just kids." The guard shot him a venomous look. "Stay out of it, sir. This is a security matter." But the spell was broken. Another passenger murmured her agreement. Mrs. Davenport, seeing the tide of opinion potentially shifting, sniffed loudly. They should have moved when they were first asked. All this disruption. It was chaos, a vortex of accusation, fear, and a dawning sense of collective responsibility. Amara was still resisting. Ayana was trying to verbally intervene. The security guard was escalating, and the entire flight was held hostage to this ugly, unnecessary conflict. As the guard's grip tightened on Amara's arm, just as all hope seemed lost, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the chaos from the jet bridge. A voice that would instantly stop every person in their tracks. That's enough. He wasn't just another late passenger. He was the man whose name was on the side of the plane. Well, not his name, but the name of the company he ran. Robert Sterling stepped from the jet bridge into the cabin, and the atmosphere changed in a heartbeat. It wasn't that he was physically imposing, though he was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of quiet power. It was the aura of absolute authority that radiated from him. The frantic energy in the cabin dissipated, replaced by a sudden, stunned silence. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. The security guards, the terrified face of the woman filming, the male passengers still standing, the belligerent expression on Mrs. Davenport's face, the trembling but defiant form of his daughter, Ayana, and finally, the security guard's hand clamped firmly on Amara's arm. His face, which had been set in a neutral business mask, hardened into something cold and dangerous. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He walked, his footsteps unnervingly quiet on the cabin carpet, until he was standing directly in front of the security officer. He spoke, and his voice, though low, carried to every corner of the silent cabin. "Take your hand off my daughter." It wasn't a request. It was a command backed by an unassailable authority the guard had never encountered before. The guard's hand recoiled from Amara's arm as if it had been burned. He stammered, his procedural bravado evaporating instantly. "Sir, there was a passenger dispute." Robert Sterling held up a hand to silence him, his gaze never leaving the man's face. "Your name, and your colleague's name." Miller. He's Davis." "Miller and Davis," Robert Sterling repeated, the names tasting like ash in his mouth. "Who authorized you to put your hands on a 16-year-old child on my aircraft?" "My aircraft." The two words hung in the air, shifting the balance of power so completely it was like watching the world turn upside down. Cassandra, who had been standing behind the officers looking vindicated, went pale. Her eyes widened in dawning horror. Mrs. Davenport's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and then alarm. The guard, Miller, pointed a shaky finger at the flight attendant. She called us. Said they were uncooperative." Robert Sterling's head slowly turned, and he fixed his piercing gaze on Cassandra. She looked like a cornered animal. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Is that what you told them?" "Mr. Sterling, sir." She stammered, wringing her hands. "There was a booking error. The system, it must have glitched. I was trying to accommodate Mrs. Davenport. She's one of our most loyal Platinum members." "Show me the booking error," Robert said, his voice flat. He turned to his daughters. "Girls, your boarding passes." Ayana, her hand no longer shaking, held up her phone once more. Robert Sterling glanced at the screen for a single, symbolic second. He didn't need to read it. He knew his daughters, and he knew they would never be in the wrong in a situation like this. The text from Ayana had been sparse, but it was all he needed. He'd been in a board meeting, felt the vibration, and the simple, desperate plea, "They need you," had him out of his chair and sprinting towards the gate before his CFO had even finished the quarterly report. He turned his attention to the woman in tweed. "Mrs. Davenport." He addressed her by name, and she flinched. "I'm the CEO of this airline. Your loyalty, as you call it, is to the rules and decency of civil society, which you have just violated. Your platinum status is revoked. Your ticket for this flight is canceled. You will be placed on our permanent no-fly list. Now, you will gather your belongings and disembark from my plane." Immediately, a collective gasp went through the cabin. This wasn't just a reprimand. It was a public excommunication. Mrs. Davenport's face turned a mottled shade of red and white. "This is outrageous. I am a paying customer. I will sue." "You do that," Robert Sterling said, his tone utterly dismissive. "Security," he said, now looking at Miller and Davis, "escort Mrs. Davenport off the premises. Then go to the airport administrative office. You are both suspended, pending a full investigation into your use of force. You're finished at this airport." The two guards, now looking terrified, meekly complied, flanking a sputtering Mrs. Davenport and guiding her off the plane. The cabin was silent, watching the swift, brutal efficiency of true power. Then, Robert Sterling turned back to the last remaining antagonist, Cassandra. She was visibly trembling, her face ashen. "You," he said, and the single word was filled with a universe of contempt. "You stood in the cabin of an airline that I have spent my life building, and you chose prejudice over proof. You chose to humiliate two children rather than inconvenience a bully. You chose to lie and summon force against paying passengers, my daughters. You do not represent a Ascender. You represent the worst kind of failure, a failure of character." Your employment is terminated. Effective immediately. Get your personal items and get off this aircraft. The justice was absolute. The reversal was complete. The audience in the cabin, the jury of strangers, finally broke their silence. A few people started to clap, a tentative sound that grew into a wave of relieved, supportive applause. The man who had stood up for the girls gave a wide grin and a thumbs up. The woman who had been filming lowered her phone, a look of profound satisfaction on her face. The helplessness and fear of moments before had vanished, washed away by a tidal wave of cathartic, righteous satisfaction. It was the ultimate payoff. The bullies had not just been stopped. They had been utterly and publicly vanquished. But as Robert Sterling knelt down to wrap his arms around his shaken daughters, the immediate justice was just the beginning. What happened after the plane landed is what would turn this ugly incident into a powerful, industry-changing movement. Justice on a single flight is a moment. Forging that justice into a shield for every future passenger, that's a legacy. The rest of the flight to London was quiet. The empty seats of Mrs. Davenport and the disgraced crew served as silent monuments to the drama that had unfolded. But for the Sterling family, the relief was mixed with a sobering reality. The applause had felt good, the justice satisfying, but the wounds were real. The humiliation, the fear, the feeling of being judged unworthy. Those things don't simply vanish when the antagonists do. As the plane soared over the Atlantic, Robert Sterling wasn't just comforting his daughters. He was confronting a profound failure within his own company. He had built an airline on the promise of connecting people, of lifting them up, but the machinery he had created had been weaponized against his own children. This incident could have been swept under the rug. A few firings, a quiet settlement, a return to business as usual. But that was not the Sterling way. In the days that followed, Robert didn't just issue a corporate apology. He launched what would become known throughout the industry as the Ascend Initiative. It was a promise sealed by a multi-million-dollar investment to conduct a top-to-bottom overhaul of Ascendair's culture. It wasn't about adding a new rule to a manual. It was about rewiring the company's DNA. Mandatory, rigorous, and ongoing anti-bias training became standard for every single employee, from baggage handlers to the board of directors. They hired leading sociologists and de-escalation experts to rebuild their customer service protocols from the ground up, focusing on empathy, verification, and the protection of all passengers, not just the ones with platinum cards. Robert Sterling made it his personal mission to ensure that the name Ascendair would become synonymous not with luxury, but with respect. But the most powerful change didn't come from the corporate boardroom. It came from seats 1A and 2A. Amara and Ayana returned from London not as victims, but as veterans of a battle they hadn't chosen but had nonetheless won. They realized their story was not unique. It was just one of the few that had a CEO, for a father, and a dramatic, cinematic ending. How many others had faced the same prejudice without the same power? How many have been quietly moved, deplaned, or humiliated with no one to intervene? Fueled by this question, they took their trauma and forged it into a tool. They created First-Class Citizens, a name that was both a nod to their ordeal and a powerful declaration of principle. It started as a blog, a place to tell their full story in their own words. But it quickly grew. It became a podcast where they interviewed travelers who had faced discrimination based on race, disability, or religion. It became a YouTube channel and a vibrant social media platform, creating a community for people to share their experiences and demand accountability from the travel industry. They weren't just telling stories of injustice. They were celebrating diversity in travel, highlighting inclusive companies, and providing resources for people to know their rights. They transformed from passengers into powerful advocates, their voices amplified by the very technology that had both documented their humiliation and summoned their rescue. The story of the flight became a parable. It was a story about the insidious nature of everyday bias, but it was also a story of empowerment. It showed that a terrible experience could be the catalyst for profound and positive change. The final emotional payoff wasn't just seeing Mrs. Davenport escorted off the plane. It was seeing Amara and Ayana, months later, standing on a stage at a travel conference, speaking with confidence and grace, turning their pain into a platform for progress. They had taken the ugliest of moments and used it to build something beautiful and strong, ensuring that the legacy of their flight wasn't just about the justice they received, but about the justice they were now building for everyone else. Amara and Ayana's story didn't end when that flight landed. It was just the beginning. They're fighting to make sure no one ever feels the way they did, and they are not alone. To see how other young activists are turning personal injustice into global movements, click to watch this next video on the new wave of Gen Z activism. You won't want to miss it.